the expectations people have around grief, whether it's coming from the outside or the inside, doesn't matter, is very often what makes it much harder. Whether it's, for example, how long you should be grieving, you know, this typical, oh, it's been already a few months, it's been already a year, it's been already 5 years. The next one that's also really big is, why are you grieving that much? It was just a pet. It was just your neighbor. It was just a celebrity, as you said earlier. And I think those two are huge. And then the third one is also this expectation what grief should look like. You know, whether it's like crying or like eating all the time or sleeping or whatever it is. I think like these are, and you can tell me how you see it, but these are 3 fundamental mindsets or perspectives people have that restrict them on their grief journey. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Purple Stars podcast. My name is Sarah, I'm your host, and we have a guest back that you really love. He's my friend, Stuart, and so many of you requested for him to come back on the show, and fortunately, he said yes. Please welcome Stuart.
Hi. It's good to be back.
You're so funny. Hi. I could hear in the pause, hi. I had no other choice than saying yes to Sarah.
Yeah, your mum threatened me.
Oh my God, you're so funny. So, Stuart, today we chose a topic which is grief. And maybe I just give a little backstory why grief. So I was thinking, with all the holidays coming up, winter being around, I think grief is hard any day of the year, but I think it's a season where the waves can hit a little harder and come, a little bit more frequent. So I thought I want to record an episode about grief, but then I also felt I want a second person with me on the podcast so we can hold a little bit more space for all of this, and also to bring a little bit of laughter into this topic. And then obviously I thought I'm going to bring on Stuart.
The funniest thing as well, like just as you said, as you mentioned laughter, one of my dogs is right down to my left, and she farted. So as you was mentioning that, it's a strange thing. So grief, like, because it's an interesting thing we've talked about it as one of the things we bonded over, and laughter is a big part of it. There's just something about a dog farting. They just like fart jokes will break anything, sort of any tension, and she's actually rubbing her behind on her bed.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I love that. Okay, that's already a little taste how this episode is going to be.
Not literal taste. Well, actually, you've not smelt it. You've not smelt it. So the taste is, pungent.
Oh my God.
Meaty.
Stuart,
Yes.
while I was preparing, I thought I would ask you. Well, while I set up my mic
while you were doing your hair
and the laptop and my hair, I must admit, ever since I have a short hair, it's like quite difficult for me to have a style currently that I like. So I literally just put it all back. It's
no problem. I know about.
Yeah. Good for you. So, but what I really wanted to ask, because I thought, you know what, I would love to open our episode with the question, if you had to define or describe grief to someone else, how would you describe it?
Oh, man, can you think of one of the hardest questions in the planet to just open up?
Well, like I am
don't
definitely not
know.
easy on you, but also like not from a, not like, not a psychological definition, but like something that just like personal. Yeah.
So it's an amazing question, and I'm cheating. I'm curious what the dictionary definition is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, intense sorrow, especially caused by someone's death, or the informal one is trouble or annoyance, um, which
Hmm.
I mean, we'll focus on this the actual one I suppose we're expecting, which is about uh, intense sorrow caused
Mm-hmm.
by someone's death. I mean, intense sorrow is the perfect. Like, I couldn't think of the combination of two better words to describe what, for me, what grief is,
Mm.
or my experiences of it. It's intense sorrow, um, but it's not just to do with death. That's what, for me, grief can hit you in ways you don't even expect. Um, that could be. I remember I had some cats, and because of uh, having to move and things, like I had to give the cats away for like adoption. Find them a correct home. It wasn't possible the way I was working and things. And I truly, like, the moment I saw the car drive away, like, oh my god, the grief I experienced. Like, I had a proper breakdown. Like, truly,
Mm.
like, the tears were flooding, and that's knowing the cats are going to a good home, to a family, all those things. But it doesn't change how, and it's not death that the healthy,
Mm-hmm.
but like the sense of loss and that grief I
Mm.
experienced from that, and then also the thing that makes grief so specific is it's not just loss, it's there's a prolongedness to it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it comes back. There's waves of it. Um, and then and there's the things like deaths again, where will experience I personally will experience grief. Like, obviously when my dad died, that was uh, it was so intense, and it's mixed with so many different things. However, I didn't really feel that with other deaths in my family. Like, yes, the sorrow, but not in that intense experience. you know
Mm.
the, the sadness, and there's the empathy that you have for those that are experiencing grief. But, like, even when I was younger and I didn't really fully understand death, the like when grandparents would die, I didn't have the grief. So that's what I mean. It's an interesting one. So intense sorrow, it makes perfect sense, but not necessarily purely, for me anyway, tied to someone's death.
It's really beautiful how you tied in everything, because I totally agree. Like, it's definitely intense sorrow, but for me, it's also like it's a it's a combination of many different feelings. Like, I think it also depends where on your journey you are with grief, because there comes a time where you feel, because for example, when I think about my grandmother's death, like when I miss her, or sometimes when I listen to her song and I'm like, wow, that was one of her favorite songs, and I feel this wave of grief sometimes coming. It's not like an intense sorrow, it's more oh, I wish we could like sing it together right now. So I think it's like it's a feeling, or feelings that are changing. And yes, it's definitely not just tied to physical death, because as you said, you can even like grieve for someone else. Like, I remember when I was still at college, a friend of mine lost his mom very suddenly, and I hardly knew her, but I was so close to him that I was grieving too, because I saw my friend being so sad, and I was so like, I felt this deep sorrow that he is so young and lost his mom, you know, like at 20 or 21, however old we were at that age. And I also think, like, I say this often on the podcast, is anything that ends or anything that's a loss can also come with grief. Like, let's say, for example, if we have been dreaming about this one university, you know, the entire life, the entire family has been going there, and then you get this letter that you're not accepted, you know, it can also lead to like a period of grief, or a divorce, or a startup that failed. You know, like, I think there are so many different ways. And sometimes I also think that we can grieve an old version of ourselves. So I think there's like so many different reasons why we're grieving, but I think the grief is the same.
Yeah, I think, and it's so specific to each individual person.
100%. Yeah.
It's I there've been many times. I mean, we'll have all experienced. Everyone will have experienced this and witnessed it, or even had that negative behavior where we're like, where there will be some form of immediate judgment on someone else's grief and how they're handling that grief
Mm-hmm.
and expressing that grief. How can that person grieve that celebrity who has died? You've not even met them. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, and with so many of us, I think it's have this skeptical reaction to how other people grieve, that maybe they're attention seeking, this or that. But in the end,
Mm-hmm.
it's what is important to an individual person, and the loss and experience of that important thing. It's not trivial. It's like it's part of our each of us on our journey will experience those that loss in whatever form it will be.
What in my experience, what I've seen in myself, but also with clients or other people, is the expectations people have around grief, whether it's coming from the outside or the inside, doesn't matter, is very often what makes it much harder. Whether it's, for example, how long you should be grieving, you know, this typical, oh, it's been already a few months, it's been already a year, it's been already 5 years. The next one that's also really big is, why are you grieving that much? You know, it was just a pet. It was just your neighbor. It was just a celebrity, as you said earlier. And I think those two are huge. And then the third one is, I think, is also this expectation what grief should look like. You know, whether it's like crying or like eating all the time or sleeping or whatever it is. I think like these are, and you can tell me how you see it, but these are three fundamental mindsets or perspectives people have that restrict them on their grief journey.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's we I think it's human nature that we put out, you know, we view things based on our experiences, and you know, we can't help that. We can't help unless we just naturally are empathetic. But judge or experience whatever someone else is going through, but through our own sort of prism, our own lens. And then it's how we then communicate that. It's I've a long time ago I realized, like, we're talking about like in my early 20s, I was like, why? It's just like what's important to me isn't going to be important to them. So therefore, what's important to them isn't going to be important to me. But that's fine. That's theirs. That's their truth. That's what's important to them. It's their life. And now I consciously, if I feel like I am going to go in that negative way of being overly skeptical about what someone else is saying or experiencing, I stop myself because I just don't know. Even, and here's the thing, even if someone is attention seeking, like if they want to put themselves out there and get sympathy for whatever reason, what difference does that make to me anyway? I would rather take their experience and if they're going through grief for something I don't understand, I would rather take their word for it than be a skeptic and put the word just in front of what they're experiencing of that loss. And that's kind of where I've been sort of going through, so I would hope in the time of our entire friendship, you've never heard me say just to describe someone else's experience or trauma or grief. Like it's not a word I want to put out there on someone else. I might use it about describing my things, but never someone else's.
I also think, it doesn't need our understanding in order to hold space for someone else's grief.
And ultimately that's empathy. We can't understand. I will never understand what it was like for you and Lola. I can't understand. It's impossible. Even your mum can't understand that. It's only you two could experience any moments and connection you two had. That's the base. To me, that's the basis of empathy. And then it's accepting that and just listening and just supporting people through the grief they're having and how they want to channel their grief. And so the other thing as well is how people experience it and communicate their grief or share their grief. To me,
sorry to interrupt you, but I love how you changed it to sharing rather than communicating, because sometimes it might not involve words.
Yeah, and that's it. And here's the thing, sometimes what to you could be a toxic trait, a negative, based on that's unhealthy to do that. But to me, that might be my way of processing. That might be my way of coping with that. And even if it's illogical, even if it's unhealthy, that's just my journey to cope with that. And that's the thing, is it's an individual thing. It really is. So I learned that with my dad. My dad was terrible at sharing emotional stuff. He was a terrible sharer. And he had problems with alcohol. So for him, if he experienced grief, it was sort of smothered with alcohol. That's his generation in Scotland. That's what they did. They didn't talk about it. They didn't share. But as I got older, we realized it was not about alcohol addiction. It was, do you want me to stop? Can you hear that siren?
It's fine, but I think it makes it very dramatic.
Right.
That's absolutely fine. I think that's part of it.
So when we were younger, we thought, okay, it's alcohol addiction. But for him, it wasn't. It was once he managed to figure it out himself, because he couldn't communicate his relationship with alcohol, why he would use it. His relationship with alcohol became healthier. So it wasn't about cutting out substance. And I'm not here to make assessments of anyone's addictions or anything like this. I'm purely talking about my dad, my relationship with my dad. and because he had done all kinds of alcohol anonymous, and his reliance on alcohol was because it starts at such a young age, and if it for his generation in Scotland, particularly when you grow up in rural Scotland where there's nothing to do. So when you can't share, the alcohol helps the sharing. And then it becomes a dependency and all these things. But the dependency only happens when there was anxiety and stress that he wasn't capable of controlling himself. As I got older, I understood those things. And his negative process, rather than saying, don't drink, which would then put a cycle of shame on him and all this kind of stuff. So when someone close to him died, he would binge drink. What I found was the healthier way for him was to, rather than judge, there he's drinking again, it's okay, how do I help you through this? Like, as someone who's not going to judge, how do I, and what by taking that approach, having a bit more empathetic, which kind of is counterintuitive to what all teaching is. It's, I know my dad, but it helped our relationship, and all that in turn helped him start sharing with me. He felt then, because I, rather than judge, which has always been the case, but listening and just empathizing and supporting through that, any time he would experience that in the future, he would share it with me verbally and therefore not go through the drinking cycle. So I think I learned through my dad and the shame that he had with those things. We can never really judge on how people cope with stuff, even if it doesn't make logical sense. And I kind of just adapt that to everything. I think that learning experience is kind of relevant to absolutely everything we do in life. Just it's the easiest thing is to cast judgment, to assess things based on our own morality or our own logic, our own truths. And that's not necessarily the most humane way of doing things, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I didn't know that about.
Yes. Well, I always knew these things with my dad would come up at some point, but it just had to happen in a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I knew that, that he was drinking, but like the rest, I didn't know. So thank you so much for sharing this. What for the listeners who might be in a similar situation where someone close to them has an unhealthy coping mechanism, let's call it this way, like without judgment, because it could be overeating, it could be being drawn to toxic people.
That's my thing, is overeating. Like, so I'm conscious I do. I'm not a drinker, and understandably because of my dad, so it just was, it doesn't appeal to me. I never want to go in that trap. I'm conscious of that, but I'm aware that I'll be unhealthy, and so for me, with any of those things, it's about just people supporting. It's listening, and it's not even necessarily things that are said. It can even, particularly when you know someone, when you are close to someone, you know when to make a joke. You know when to be firm and assertive. So it's really a gauge of how well do you know that person, and how do you, and it's those soft skills. Some of us it's intuitive, and others have to learn it. For me, it's an intuitive thing, and the relationship I have with my friends, it's a two-way intuitive thing. So they know when to joke, to sort of shake me out of it in a way. There's another way to say, no, that's enough, done, that's unhealthy, that's making me uncomfortable. Because they know that I don't ever want to make them uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So, and because it's those people saying it to me, that and I know that it always seems to work. But again, it's every situation is different. But the first place always comes from a place of love. Like if you don't approach people with like truly from a place of compassion and love, like it's so much easier to cause offense or make things escalate. However, if the love and compassion is there at the core of every action you do, I think even if you muck up, if you make a mistake, if there is something that goes wrong, it's never as bad as it could be, because people will always intuitively feel that love and compassion. And like judgment and love tend not to come together. So it's like oil and water. So if you're coming from a place of love and compassion, that someone won't really feel judged. So I think that's the place. That's the only advice is always check the reasoning that you want to um, tackle a situation if it's unhealthy. I think it's that. What is that? Before just saying I don't like them doing that thing,
Mm-hmm.
it's about you have to really step back into yourself. Why is that? And what is the reason for that? And it has to come back truly. It's either going to be because it's bad for them or it's bad for me. They're generally the main motivations from my experience. And once you get that, if it's so much easier when it's bad for them, because that's coming from the place of love. Whereas if it's bad for me, it's protectiveness, but for ourselves. And from there, it's if the other person doesn't want to experience that, doesn't want you to feel bad, they'll respond to it. But likewise, I know with my dad, if I said to him, that's making me feel bad, he knows it does, and he can't control that. That then puts extra shame on top of it, which then continues the cycle. So every situation is different. So I'd always say that the only advice has really come from a place of compassion and love. It's just easier. It's also easier to be strong when there's compassion and love. Those supporting people through grief, at whatever stage they may be going through it, it's just easier from that place of love. Love is all you need.
Yeah, that's true. It sounds cliche, but it's true. When I think about judgment and love, like how I picture it is judgment. When we judge, we build a wall, and when we love, we build a bridge.
I agree. I completely agree. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Actually, one thing before I forget, last week we were going to do this last week, and
I need to laugh.
and well, we've been talking about doing this for months, but we were going to do this
specifically. Yeah, I was about
week.
To say.
But and actually, in the day that we were going to do it, we actually just through exchange on what I think it was WhatsApp. And we were talking about grief and things, and we were just in a good zone of discussing these things as we get into. But I loved there's something that you said, and it's stuck with me ever since. And it's such a beautiful imagery. But it was about waves, like, and the experience of grief. And again, and just bring up because you're using again beautiful imagery of walls and bridges, and it's quite interesting. Again, the bridge is something that associates with water, and so many things that when you go into imagery to describe stuff, it does tend to involve.
It's interesting, true. Yeah.
And I think it's a beautiful thing. So it's just, since we're now talking about that, I'd love you to sort of discuss for yourself, like that experience of grief and how that feels like the intensity of, and if I remember, it was about the intensity of the waves, how it changes.
Well, I think one of the best examples is probably talking about my grandmother's death. So I remember when she passed away, or maybe even like, let's rewind. When she had, so for those who don't know, like I call my grandmother Lola because she was Filipina and that means grandma. And so she had a cancer relapse, and that was 3 months before she died, we found out. And I remember at that time I was still like, I wasn't grieving, but there came a moment. I remember I was in London and I was praying to God, and I said, I don't know what to pray for. I don't know if it's the right thing to pray for her to recover, because I don't know if it's as much as I want her to stay, but she has been through so much. And I simply don't know if it's the right thing for her to come up with all this power and energy and strength, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Like, I simply don't know. And I remember I was visiting my parents, and I was in my old kids' room, and I still have books there. And I was sitting on my yoga mat, and I was meditating, and I thought, please give me a sign. And then I got up intuitively, walked straight to my bookshelf. I took out one book, and I looked at it, and I was like, man, I remember ordering that one a while ago from Amazon. I didn't like it, but it was so cheap, I didn't bother sending it back. Like, why this book, So I sat down again on my yoga mat, and intuitively, just somewhere, I opened the book, and it was a story about a grandma and her granddaughter. And I remember that was the moment when I started crying. And that story was about death. And that grandmother was explaining to her granddaughter that when people hold on to their belongings and possessions, it's very hard for them to die, like emotionally and mentally, because it's almost as if they're sitting on a chair and they're holding onto the chair while they're, being pulled upwards. It's really hard. And that story led me to another thought. And I was like, okay, if I hold on to my Lola, it's also really hard for her. And I was crying a lot. And the next day, I went to visit her, and I had a conversation with her, and I said, Lola, like, I know you're fighting for all of us, but I want you to know, if you feel like going, it's okay. And my grief started at that point. I think they call it anticipatory grief. And that was, I can't exactly remember, but around like 6, 7, 8 weeks prior her death. And then once she did pass away, I mean, the first week is a blur because, you have to organize lots of things and like the funeral and this and that. And then afterwards, I'm not even sure if I would describe it as wave, but it was a storm. Like, I thought I was drowning. There was like, it didn't feel like a single wave and then another wave, another wave. It was just like all over me. And I could feel it emotionally, mentally, physically. And it was my very first time that I experienced a loss that hit me so hard. So I didn't know. I had no experience of will it ever get better. Of course, you hear from other people it will get better, but I thought like it was very hard for me as a coach that I couldn't help myself with all the tools, you know, the tapping and the meditation and the breath work and all the things. And I ate so much, Stuart. It was insane. Like I gained within, I would say 2 months, 3 months, I gained almost 8 kilos, which is a lot. So I would like eat huge bars of chocolate, and I wouldn't even like eat them. I would inhale them. Like there was no chewing involved. At night, I would like just get in my Ugg boots and throw on a coat and like walk to the next gas station, because in Austria like supermarkets are not open that long, and get like a chocolate bar or like more of them. At a point, like the person working at the gas station even asked me if I was okay, you know, because I'm like, wow, I see you all the time. And the time when I started to breathe a little bit, I think that's maybe a good way of describing, is when I started writing. That's when I felt I get a little bit of air again, and it's not this panic underwater, will I survive? So the very first moment really when I thought, okay, I am going to face whatever it is because I have the capacity to survive. I think that's like when it really, like when I felt, okay, I'm getting over water, like I'm getting like, I'm able to be up there, breathe a little bit. And then I remember like I cried every single day. Like it was really bad. And I went through all sorts of emotions. And then at some point after, I think 6 months after my grandmother passed away, I showered and it was in the evening. And it suddenly hit me, oh my God, it was the first day I didn't cry. And then I burst into tears because I felt so bad. I felt so much guilt that I wasn't grieving so much that I went for an entire day without being sad. But that was such an important moment, such an important wave, basically, because I gave myself the permission to be okay, to be happy. And I think like we have these wave moments where I think one thing is about knowing, like getting the feeling of, I will learn how to ride the waves. And I'm not saying staying on top of the waves, you tumble, but I'm learning to get on the wave, ride it, tumble, get back up. I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is, a lot of the waves are teaching us certain lessons. And yeah, and then like one thing I also want to add, like my grandmother's death anniversary, I call it angel anniversary. It's coming up now in December, and it's been then 6 years. And one thing I've noticed this year, particularly for some reason, this last quarter triggers a lot. And I'm not necessarily saying grief per se, but the anxiety. So our family dog Henry, he had a surgery, and you know he's senior, so he's 10 years old. And before I left from Austria again to the US, I started crying so much because I thought, what if I come back and he's not here anymore? And I was like, oh, last quarter of the year, particularly that's happening. And also like I can feel like, again, more, you know, my chest, my bronchial tubes, which is all like sadness and grief. So I think like it's also good to know that certain times can not just trigger grief, but also the emotions that we had during the time back then, if that makes sense.
To me, it makes perfect sense. I hadn't realized actually it was so it was December 2018.
Yes.
Yeah. So my dad died in February 2018.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when I first met you, then that would have been, so it was
Shortly
still
after my
recent. It was like
grand,
6 months
yeah,
afterwards.
very, very shortly afterwards.
I hadn't realized. But yeah, because what actually that reminded me when the part reason we were messaging last week was it was the anniversary of the last time I saw my dad, and I hadn't realized. So
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned it to you. Those anniversaries are very like it's strange. So I have the two because I didn't live in the same city as my dad. I was in Manchester for a long time, in England for a long time, and he was in Glasgow. So I wouldn't see him that regularly. Um, and so I have the two anniversaries. I have the anniversary of his death, which is 10 days before his birthday. So February sucks. I never like February anyway. It's terrible, but that's extra. And then the anniversary of the last time I saw him, which is sort of the last week of October. And hadn't hit me for a while, but last week I was just like, the weather here in Madrid's been, it was, in the words in Scottish would be three. It was three. It
Mm-hmm.
was just raining. It was constantly grey, and the temperature dropped so much. And it started the whole thing. So the Scottishness kicked in. Is like I was making porridge in the morning. I was making porridge, and I learned to make porridge. My dad taught me how to make porridge when I was like 6. It's a Scottish rite of passage. Um, and so I just that it probably started to seep in there. The change of temperature, the change of weather, and then that starts the process of okay, I'm making porridge, and that porridge is something I start reminiscing. This is how my dad would. The next thing you know, it sneaks up in you. You start listening to Scottish country music, and and then you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to listen to the BBC Scotland Take the Floor show, which my dad would listen to once a week. That little nostalgic thing of Scottish Ceilidh music, and in a few days you pass and like, oh, I've next thing you know, I'm walking around and I'm starting to whistle or sing to myself "Flower of Scotland" while I'm outside walking the dogs, national anthem. I'm like, what is going on? This is like I've just been taken over by Scottish expatriateness. This is bizarre. What is happening to me? And I was like, and then it sort of, I was making I was making dinner. I was making a, a Scottish stew. I was just like, oh, and I was just like, is this? Oh my god, it is. This is the anniversary week of when I last saw my dad. And I just
Wow.
that week bought some Scottish oatcakes, and that was his little thing. He would have Scottish
Mm-hmm.
oatcakes with a little bit of butter and a bit of cheese on it. And it's like all these things. And the day before, I'd ordered whiskey from Tobermory, which is the time. I was like, what? Like all these things, and I was just like, it's just came to like no conscious thing. It was just I was being directed that way, and it was all within the anniversary week of the last time I saw him. But lots of positive reminders, positive nostalgia. So
Mm-hmm.
not the missing where I wish they were here. It was just like all positive associations of either learnings from him or all that kind of stuff or shared moments were coming through. And and it and when we were talking and when you mentioned that, I was just like, it's a beautiful way of describing it because it felt like a ferocious wave when I was experiencing the grief after I lost him. But this felt like I was now I had gone from the ferocious waves that are off the west coast of Scotland, off the Isle of Mull where he was from, to now being in the quite like a tranquil Loch Lomond where there's no waves and it's just peaceful and it's just calm. And that's where I am now with that memory. So I don't even know if that's grief or not, because I've gone from the wild of ocean
Mm-hmm.
waves to this loch, and it's calm and it's peaceful. And that's now where I am with that relationship with my dad's death. So we're now in that. I'm not missing wishing he was here. I was just like, oh, he would have liked that. That would have been cool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, or like if if I do something that he taught me to do when I was a kid, like how to make a log fire, chop wood, how to make a log fire, all those manly rural
Mm.
Scottish things. Like everyone on that little thing, he would have liked that.
Mm.
So it's
I
yeah,
love
so
that.
it's just that. It's that thing of maybe I don't know if I'm not learned enough into this space, but my experience is the grief I experienced after his death felt like the wild
Mm-hmm.
ocean waves off the Isle of Mull, but now it feels like it's not. So I don't know if that's grief or a stage of grief, or if this is just the place of my relationship with his loss, the loss of him
Mm-hmm.
is maybe that's moving on from grief, and it's just that is where it is. That his memory, my experience, those connections with him is now this peaceful loch.
I love how you describe it like as a peaceful loch, but I also think it's important to point out people can only like move from the wild storm water where they feel they're drowning to a peaceful lake or whatever they want to describe it if they allow themselves to feel the emotions, because otherwise like it's a shadow that's never going to like go away. So I think that's like it's an important part to point out, you know, like you got to allow yourself to grieve. And as we said in the beginning, it's grief is such a personal journey, and we got to allow ourselves to also explore and see, you know, like for some people it might be cleaning out the house, for others it's going to therapy, for the next one it might be meditating, for the next one is like, hey, I'm moving to a new country. Everyone has a different way of facing their fear and then moving through the emotions. I also think it changes with seasons, you know, like I was writing like crazy in the beginning, and then like, you know, like now when I experience grief, regardless what it's like, why I go a lot to church, or I love spending time in nature. I love cuddling Felix, my dog. You know, it's I think it's also good to explore and allow ourselves to feel differently. And what what I find so interesting about grief, like how I would also describe it, not just like intense sorrow, but I think it's a privilege. It's definitely a privilege because it's the sign that we got to experience or get to experience one of the most beautiful gifts, and that's the gift of love. And so that's also something that really has helped me to like shift my mindset about grief. And like, while like obviously I'm not going to deny you can feel very lost, you can feel very lonely, it can be super exhausting, it can be one of the most painful experiences, but it's only that painful because we got to experience like deep love, you know. And so I like I always want to experience grief. Like I want to I want to be able to say, yes, my heart is so wide open that I love so much that I'm also grieving that much. And yeah. And it's beautiful how you talk about all the memories and that like you cook, and I also think it's not a coincidence that you felt drawn to the Scottish ambience and traditions and meals during that week. It's beautiful how the spirits like guide us and how things align. Like it's, and I think
Yeah,
that's for
because
me. Oh, sorry. I just quickly wanted to add, like, I think that was one of the most comforting things for me in general in life, not just with grief, having this synchronicities where I know, okay, I'm fine, or they're not gone. Like their spirit is still around, you know? Like I think everyone experiences that differently, but it's definitely one of the big pillars that has helped me. Like, and it just always feels like a little, like, or not just a little, but actually like a big, warm, loving blanket.
I've I I was worried I was becoming one of those Scottish people I've despised, where everything in the homeland is just so much better because I'm no longer there. I honestly thought, I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna be wearing tartan pants and like I'm gonna if I start saying "ochai the new," just like I'm done. Like what's going on? This is it's a strange. Oh, actually no, it's the anniversary of when the last time I saw my dad. That's okay then. It's all right. That's okay. I'm actually quite comfortable with that. That's fine. That's normal. That's healthy. That's beautiful. Rather that than become some sort of caricature Scotsman that lives abroad.
Mm-hmm.
I,
It's so funny.
I am that would have scared me a hell of a lot more. But no,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's when we're the type of people that can intensely love something, or we intensely connect with something, the inevitably you that will be lost at some point. It's part of the human journey. Um, and if we're not necessarily prepared for that loss, if it comes, particularly if it comes out and it's snatched away from us, the that loss is equally as intense as that last positive feeling we had with that thing. That's why I
Mm.
believe the two kind of uh, go together. So if you intensely love something and the surprise is it's just gone, it's that grief hits you with the same sort of intensity, and that's just part of our journey, particularly as people that have a lot of love. And that's not a bad thing. It's just it's part of it. And once we learn to embrace it, like it's makes our journeys as humans more real, like more connected to everything around us. I wouldn't share the real moments, the intense, beautiful moments I have with people for anything. And the losses that I have with them validate that intense, beautiful moment, that connection. I and I'm grateful for that now. That's the my experience. It's grateful. I'd rather feel that, because if not, then I'm like, I would question myself and everything I believe about myself and how I can. Because so many of my how I navigate life is based on like instinctive emotions. Like when I interact with someone, meet someone, and experience something. And so if I if my reaction doesn't match what I would expect, so if I don't feel grief in that situation, I'm then going to think, oh, what's wrong with me? Because am I not as in touch or loving things as I
Mm-hmm.
actually? In that same way that you then had grief for not feeling for crying, like
Yeah.
it's that thing of I would actually be more worried by not experiencing. And that doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
it's going to come out of floods of tears or anything, but I will feel it no matter what. I will feel that loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to feel that loss, because otherwise I don't ever want to be that skeptical. I would have to be skeptical to not feel. And that's not to say
Mm-hmm.
other people don't feel love to the same intensity without being skeptics. My my best friend doesn't grieve the same way as I do. It's all his father passed away about a year or so after mine. His experience was completely different. His reaction was completely different. I know how much he loves his father.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that for me, I know how I would react, and if I don't react that way, I'd actually be
Yeah, I think so too. And I like when I talk once more about what we said before, like it's not just like comes with loss. I I was thinking this morning, oh, like when I think this year, like what moments of grief did I have? And some were funny and some not that funny. But like one, for example, was my granddad, so my Lola's husband. He had to move now into like a retirement home because he has dementia. I was very sad because it happened during a time where I wasn't in Austria, or I also couldn't travel to Austria. And I thought, wow, when I come back, Lola's home will be gone. Like it was hard for me. But then, for example, I had a pretty funny grief moment too. Like when we got Felix, you know, like he was so tiny. And the first day he lifted his leg to pee, I was really sad because I was like, oh, my baby boy is growing up.
that is so you.
I was like, my baby, I called my mom. I was like, he just lifted his leg. Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, but like, and also, yeah, so I think animals can help us so much with grief. It's so incredible the capacity they have to hold space for what we are feeling, and often that we are not even aware that we are feeling. It's incredible. Like for example, the other day I had a coaching session. I was like, wow, like I felt like it was very intense that day. And Felix immediately walked over and sat on my lap for the entire session. And I was so grateful because I thought, wow, you know, it's just animals really help us heal. And it's just so incredible, like how much they love us to hold space for all the breakdowns we have.
Out of interest, because I know it's something you believe in, do you think there's an energy transference through that, like a physical connection when you're cuddling, stroking Felix?
If there's an energy transaction.
Yeah, the transference. So that negative energy that you're feeling, and he comes
Mm-hmm.
up to observe. Do you feel like there is that transference because he's not just there, but you're cuddling him, so that physical connection,
Mm-hmm.
like he's sponging
So
it up.
yeah, so my belief is that we are all connected for a certain energetic field. So you and I have one, even if you're right now in Madrid, like, you know, you don't need to be in the same location in order to have that. And a very simple example is when you walk into a room, you can feel if there's a good energy or if there is a bad energy. So I think that's a very good example, like how we are energetically connected and how the energy is there. And how I see it, like coming to your question with animals, is first of all, like no animal comes into our life by coincidence. I think they choose us. Like I always like how I imagine it is like their soul is already, you know, like up there planning things, making sure like we are at that time there. And it could be, you know, an animal, a previous animal that's already passed away, or a new animal that's been prepared by the one that's passed away. So I think, you know, there are many different scenarios. But in the case of Felix, I really feel like he is like, my belief is like he reincarnated like our very first dog. Like I even see similar traits. Like it's insane. And and yeah, so I think like that's just what I want to say from a soul level perspective. And then when it comes from an energy, I definitely believe that there is an exchange and also mirroring, and also something that can be transferred. And I'm not always saying in a positive way. And it's the same with humans as well. You got to think of all the like generational traumas. Like that's, I think, also a very good example how things can be even passed on over generations from people that you don't even know. So I think when I feel better, it doesn't necessarily mean that Felix had to take on my heavy emotion that moment in order for me to feel better. But I do think if we don't process our emotions, that it can negatively impact our animals. And this can show, for example, through physical symptoms they have, through anxiety, through behavioral issues they have. So I definitely think that that's the case. And there are even studies when like, so there's a Swedish university, they did a test, like a study on stress. So they measured in people their cortisol levels, and they did the same with their animals through just a hair sample, and their cortisol levels were basically identical. And I think that really shows how much we're connected. And whether you call it like, emotional connection or energetic connection or soul connection, doesn't matter what you use the word for. But there is energy within us, and it influences the energy around us. Like I always imagine, as coming back to the water, when you like throw in a stone and all the ripples are like coming out. That's just how it is. And another good example is we all have people that make us feel better just by their presence without them saying anything. Also people that make us feel way worse just by their presence. And I think that's another really great example how energy has an impact on someone else's energy. And with animals, it's even more intense, since they don't have an ego, like their energy is so pure. There's also no placebo. It's not like they think, oh, my mom, she did the tapping, now I feel better. No, it really is the case. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Because I think it's. I know that you're knowledgeable, that you fully believe in energies, and I do to quite an extent. So, and I just thinking of my relationship with the dogs when I feel there, and then I also relate that to things like Reiki, which is transference
Mm-hmm.
of negative energy out of the body and all these kind of things. So I was curious in your thoughts on if something similar, if there's connections like
Mm-hmm.
where either they're taking their negative out or they're giving the positive, loving to you. Like, is
Mm-hmm.
there an actual physical transference? I think it's a fascinating thing.
Oh yeah, 100%. And also all of that energy philosophy goes back way back. If you think of like Chinese medicine, the energy is called qi. In um, in Japan, it's called ki. So if it's like Reiki, they're just like different words. And in the end, all these modalities, whether it's like meditation or acupuncture or Ayurveda, it's all like the goal and intention is to get the energy flowing. The energy within yourself, the energy that's flowing with the people and the animals you're interacting. In the end, that's all it is. We want to harmonize the energy flow, just to like simplify it.
You know, I agree with you. just missed that thing for years.
That is so funny. Yeah, but I'm like, as you know, I'm such a big believer in energy medicine. That's how I call it. It has transformed my life, and so many people around me, whether it's like my family members, my clients, also animals. And I think if we can have more awareness of how our energy impacts the energy of the people and the animals around us, vice versa, we can really create a world where animals and humans heal together. If we have more awareness for that, if we act on that awareness, I think it would be a lot easier, a lot happier. And I'm not saying it will be easy all the time, but it would resolve so many things, because when you look at animals, like so much of their suffering or dis-ease comes out of love for us, because like how I imagine it is they're going through that dis-ease to show us where we still need the healing. And I think that's one of the most beautiful ways to express unconditional love.
I think that's like the perfect way as well to end this.
I was about to say the same.
Like, that's like, what more can you add? Like, talking about grief and then ending with unconditional, the most perfect example of unconditional love is it's ideal. There we go. Bye.
So funny. And I felt the same. It's like perfect.
Yeah. But the funniest thing is, actually, if we're thinking, it actually starts with me talking about the energy of transference out of Mala's ass.
Yeah, farting. But also, we started with the dog and we finished with like, it's like just like full circle. Oh my God, I love that. Stuart, thank you so much. It's really interesting because, you know, we didn't prepare anything for the episode. So I literally had zero idea what direction this episode is going to take. But I'm very grateful, like, where it took us.
It's one of the main reasons I love our conversations. They're genuine. They're truthful. They're genuine. I just hope that there's enough there, or not too much, that other people can take some form of meaning or enjoyment out of it, rather than us just talking for an hour, 15 minutes. It's but good for us, if nothing else.
I cannot already tell you 3 things that people for sure can take away. And I just threw out the number 3 without knowing if there are 3. But the number 1 is, you know, like the judgment. You know, if we want to like connect, if we want to love, like judgment is not like taking us to the healing. Like it's building a wall and not a bridge, whether it's like judgment towards ourselves or towards others. So I think like your reminder to try, I'm not saying it's always easy and always possible, but to at least try to move from judgment to not understanding, but to love and to compassion rather than understanding. And then I think the second one is a lot what we talked about, the waves and how things change and what we can learn throughout trying to surf the waves. I think that's like a really big one. And then the third one is definitely also like the interaction with our animals and how we hopefully can create day by day more world where we can heal together. So I think 3 things. I mean, like, what more would you want? And then also that you and I together, we're really funny.
At least we think so. That's all that matters.
That's all that matters. Stuart, thank you so much. Thank you. Bye. It's a wrap for today, everyone. We hope you loved the episode. And if you think there is some comfort in this for someone that you love, please share it with them, and also share your thoughts with us on Instagram. Head over there. We'd always love to hear from you. And also know you are not alone. Like, grief is a journey that it might be very personal, but we're all on this journey. So see you next Wednesday.